Is today's Christianity more or less diverse than shortly after Jesus' death? Hello, and welcome to my ex-Christian Bible study bonanza. I am here to help you deconstruct. We're diving into the textbook, The New Testament, by Dr. Bart D. Ehrman, ex-Christian and biblical historian. I highly suggest you follow him on social media, get this book, and follow me, of course, as I deconstruct and share my spiritual journey. Let's jump into what I learned from chapter 1, which is titled, What is the New Testament? Christianity started out as a diverse set of beliefs, and as time went on, the beliefs became more and more narrow. Almost any church across the world that calls themselves Christian believes doctrines established by the Proto-Orthodox Christians in the first 400 years of the Common Era, formerly AD, now abbreviated CE, so the 400 years after Jesus' alleged birth. It is an absolute fact that Christians today perpetuate the same squabbles as those in the early days, namely the "who is a real Christian?" question. You've seen it, I've seen it, we've all gotten comments about it. Real Christians don't act that way, so why are you criticizing all Christians? I'm going to break it to you. Yes, they do. So the question is, what is a real Christian? My definition, which you're free to disagree about, but that's what we use here on my page, is anyone who, 1, says they follow Jesus, and 2, calls themselves a Christian. I do not accept the no true Scotsman fallacy. It takes attention off incredibly important issues and puts it onto some straw man that distracts us from things we need to be discussing as a culture. No, thank you. In the early days of Christianity, there were varied beliefs, but in the textbook, Dr. Ehrman highlights 3 main groups whose beliefs differ from what we today think of as Christians. First were the Ebionites. The Ebionites believed Jesus was an amazing man chosen by God, but that he wasn't divine. To call Jesus God was a blasphemous lie. And Paul, who allegedly wrote 13 books of the current-day Bible, was the worst kind of heretic. I can kind of relate to these guys because even as an ex-Christian, I sort of believe both those things. Jesus isn't God, Paul is an asshole. The most important part of the Ebionites' belief was that to become a Christian, you first had to become Jewish. After all, in Matthew 5:17, Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Oops. Just a second, there was no New Testament back then. I bring that verse up to show that some of these heretical beliefs made it into the Bible, which further helps us deconstruct what we were taught since we're seeing the emperor's clothes. So we've got the Ebionites who say that Jesus was chosen and you need to become Jewish to become Christian. Then we have the Marcionites. The Marcionites built their platform around anti-Semitism, which definitely made it into current-day Christianity. They went on and on about the Hebrew Bible portraying an evil, vengeful God, and the God of the New Testament being all, God is love and light. By the way, that means they believed in 2 gods, not 1. And what about Jesus? Well, Jesus didn't have a body. He was actually some kind of divine phantasm who didn't suffer any physical pain when he died. The Marcionites' conception of holy writings was pretty much opposite of the Ebionites, since they thought Paul was the shit and Jewish law needed to be kicked to the curb. No Old Testament, a bunch of Paul's letters, and shortened versions of the Gospels that we know today were their jam. Now we're at my favorite heretical Christian group, the Gnostics. I always root for the underdog, so I just love them. Now, in this textbook, the Gnostics' beliefs are simplified. One of the prevailing theories today is that the people we call Gnostics had varying beliefs among themselves. Unfortunately, the Gnostics had some anti-Semitic beliefs as well. Everybody was a real mess back then, but they have such a fascinating cosmology that many books have been written about them. Let's get to the basics. They thought that God, as worshipped by Jews and other Christians, was a twisted being that created the world with suffering in it because he's evil. He has his own realm, which he thinks is heaven, but he's wrong. The true heavenly realm is far bigger and far beyond him, and Jesus was sent from that celestial realm to tell us that God is a liar and a malevolent being. Who doesn't love this fucking drama? They had a bunch of other texts that didn't make it into the Bible. They liked the New Testament Gospel of John, but they also had Gospels of Mary, Philip, Judas, Peter, Thomas, and some others. These books disappeared off the earth for a while, but we have portions of most of them now, which we found at Nag Hammadi in 1945. And they are fascinating. I want you to remember, the Gnostics are real Christians. They called themselves Christians. They insisted that they were Christians. They argued with other Christians about who was a real Christian. But most importantly, Jesus' time on earth was pivotal to their beliefs. That is a Christian. So the final group the textbook talks about is the Proto-Orthodox Christians. These guys are the precursor to the Catholic Church and all churches across the world today, except for a handful that were hidden away for a long time. And they're the clear winner of the war, and it was a war between all these groups. They're the ones that ended up writing the Nicene Creed, and they decided which books made it into the Bible. The lie that we need to deconstruct here is their claim that other groups died out because there weren't very many of them and they weren't true believers. Both those things are false. There were a lot of other people who called themselves Christians and followed their own version of Christ. The Proto-Orthodox just didn't like their beliefs. If you take one thing from this, remember that the Proto-Orthodox Christians are the grandfathers of using verbal and physical violence to squelch heretics to push their own belief structure. The non-Proto-Orthodox Christians didn't die out because they didn't have the numbers. They died out because the Proto-Orthodox actively stamped them out by any means available. As the textbook says, the development of the canon of Scripture within Proto-Orthodox circles is in large part an attempt to define what true Christians should believe by eliminating or compromising the views of other groups. So instead of the lie that we were taught in Christianity, quote, the Christian scriptures did not drop from the sky one day in July, the year Jesus died, end quote. It was a giant fight between the Ebionites, the Marcionites, the Gnostics, and the winners, the Proto-Orthodox Christians, who brought us all the lies we're now deconstructing from. Let's go over what books the different pre-Christian groups considered holy, which is where the battle for power took place. The Ebionites, the believers who say you had to become Jewish to become Christian. They had the Old Testament, rejected the writings of Paul, and didn't know about the Gospels. We had the Marcionites, who believed in two gods, the Jewish one and the Christian one. They had a truncated New Testament of 11 books and rejected the Hebrew Bible. We have the Gnostics, who believed that the God other Christians worshipped was evil. They had their own canon of Scripture, which we can finally read again today. Opposing all these three groups were the Proto-Orthodox Christians, who are the precursors to today's Christians and who wiped the other ones off the face of the earth. They had the New Testament writings, but the 33 books weren't codified until 367 CE. Remember, Jesus supposedly died in 33 CE. It took over 300 years to get the New Testament canon. Okay, so why is this even important? For me, deconstructing is about understanding the gaps in knowledge that were left out as I was raised Christian. No one would admit that there are other books considered holy that feature Jesus, but there are. What we were taught was not the only faith Christians believed in. And now, as a witch and energy worker, I believe that the energy, beliefs, and thought patterns of all those books are still attached to Christianity. Even the being we can connect to under the name Jesus has those thought patterns connected to him. And if you don't believe in energy, if you're an atheist, the metaphor holds. Christianity and the person of Jesus are what we say they are. Understanding the entire scope of belief helps wrestle the toxic tentacles from our brains. And that's what we're here for, right? Trying to get those toxic tentacles out of our brains.